So again, just a quick review what we've been talking so far. There are two main ways to develop on Google Glass, to develop a glassware. One is Mirror API, which is server-based programming. We went through a little bit more details yesterday. Hopefully you enjoyed and had a little bit more deeper understanding how these whole things work with your website and Google's API server and the end user's Glass. And today we are going to talk about GDK, which is Glass Development Kit. And it's basically another small layer on top of Android SDK. So today we're going to talk a lot about Android programming and creating native apps using Eclipse. And again, it's the same website that has official information about both of the development environments. So feel free to refer to that website as well. So it's GDK. Again, it's Android 4.0.3 ICS plus some Glass-specific APIs. So and again, even if you run a pure Android application, it will mostly run fine on Glass, although the screen might not look that nice. It might, some fonts or buttons might look weirdly big or small, but should basically at least launch and show you the first screen, although you might not be able to do text inputs and so forth. So I would like to again emphasize that it's basically Android programming. So if you want to find some functions that you want to look for, I would strongly recommend first look those functions in the Glass development website to see if they have kind of replaced some functions with another classes or functions. But if you don't find any features in that level, please make sure you also look at Android SDK as well for the function you're looking for. So, and then these are some of the features that GDK adds on top of Android SDK. So it's mainly about making the UI more friendly to Glass, look similar to the timeline interface and the cards, which is the main items on the timeline. And then it also wraps up how it deals with the menu system to make it appear more friendly to Glass user interface. And also there are some differences between dealing with touchpad input and some media such as sound, camera, and voice input. But basically those low-level functions are all the same with Android SDK. Today we're going to use ADT bundle, which we've already set up yesterday. So I don't think you'll need to have that much setup changes. So in this tutorial, I'll be using GDK 1.7 and ADT bundle, which is downloadable from the android.com developer website. And you might need to install a Google USB driver again. There is a little bit, it is a little bit tricky for Windows users, but we'll go through that a little bit later as well. So first, the first session this morning will mainly go through Android programming. Again, those who are already familiar with Android programming, I would like to strongly recommend try to just download the GDK 1 project on the, where is it? If you go to our shared folder to close this, and how do I close that? See? Yeah. If you go to our shared folder, there's code, and the first session will be using this GDK1 helloandroid.zip. So if you want to see the final code we'll have at the end of the first session, just download this and have a quick look and go for it yourself. And then at the second session, we'll be starting modifying the code we built at the first session. So if you haven't been following up what I'm doing here, just simply download this GDK1 project and import it into your development environment. That will make sure you'll be on the same page for the next session. All right. So Android development, there are a couple of components that consist Android apps. The main component that you'll hear a lot of times is activity. So activity itself is a single screen with a user interface, which is basically if you launch an app and you see something on the screen and you can interact with it, that's wrapped up in a component called activity. And if you press a button and then it changes to another screen, usually it's another activity that comes on top of the previous activity. And it's the most widely used main components. And activities can, again, invoke another activity to start, or even ask another activity in another application, such as if you write an Android application that you want to make a phone call. The thing is, you don't have to program everything about making a phone call, but you can actually call a standard system activity that makes a phone call for you. So it's a little bit flexible to call activities in between different applications. So that's activity. So again, it's just simply a screen with user interface, which you can see something on the screen and touch and interact with it. And that's packaged into a component called activity. And service is a background operation that doesn't usually you can see, but it runs on the background. But sometimes it triggers another activity to start, or can trigger different types of system events. So if you have a kind of process that you want to happen on the background, such as downloading something or waiting for some messages to come in, so some event to happen in the background, and that's the service that you'll have to build. And the other two things is content provider, which is basically, you can think of a database-like component that can provide data to not only to your app, but also can provide different data to other applications as well. One of the example is the contact or phone book component in standard Android system. That's a content provider that it doesn't only provides the contact information to the phone application, but your application also can get data out of that phone book. Of course, you'll need some approval from the user side to make sure you grant those data to the custom application. But anyway, that's content provider. Broadcast receiver, it's listening to system-wide broadcast events. We'll not be using that much of content provider and broadcast receiver today, so you don't have to mind much about those components. But activities and service, we'll be using them quite often. And especially today, we'll be mostly talking about activities, and service, we'll be talking about those tomorrow when we talk about live cards. And so a little bit more detail about activities. There are one point I would like to make sure here is they're loosely bound each other. So when you want to call an activity, there are a couple of different ways to trigger another activity to start. One is to explicitly state the class name of that activity. If it's the case that you're calling another activity within your app that you've built, then there's a high chance that you, not a high chance, but pretty sure you already know the class name of that activity. So you can call that activity by the class name of it, and then you can start another activity in that way. The other way is more in an implicit way, that you call another activity through creating an intent object, and you don't have to specify a specific activity or the class name of the activity, but you just specify what kind of thing you would like to do. Like, I would like to make a phone call. You might not know what class name does the phone call activity have, but you can just say, I would like to do these kind of things, and the system will figure out which activity to start. So for some examples, browsers could be also one example. You might have multiple browsers. And if you want to just have some browser launched, then you don't have to really specify one specific browser with the class name, but you can just say, I need some browser to launch, and then the system will figure out which one to pull it out from the system. So, and navigation between activities is using a stack model. I assume all of us might be familiar with stack, which is just putting, which is literally a stack that you put something on top of another one, and it the last one goes into the stack. Is the one on the top is the one you are facing, is the current one you are dealing with, and then as you pop the stack, it will take out the items from the top. So the first one you put into the stack will come out lastly, and activities are switched between them in a stack-wise manner. So if you have one activity, say you're having a phone call activity, and then you hit a button of address book, and then it will launch an address book activity, and that activity, in this case, let's say it's activity 2, it will go on top of the activity 1, and activity 1, which was a previous activity, will go post and wait until you finish the other activities on top of it. So it will stack up like this, and if you press, once you press back button, it will go to the previous activity. So until you go down all the way to the launcher, which is the home screen of the phone. So a bit more detail about calling another activity. Again, you can call it in an explicit way, stating the class name. But as you can see here in the diagram, the actual way you call another activity is always through this intent object. So whenever you want to start another activity from your activity, is to create an intent object and tell the Android system to find the activity that this intent describes. And this intent could include the actual class name of another activity that you want to invoke, or kind of description of the activity that you would like to do in an implicit way. And for a single activity, this diagram shows a life cycle of an activity, which is from when the activity is created and used by the user, shown on the screen, used by the user, and then went off the screen because of maybe another activity came up, and then you could also come back from post state, resume from post state when the activity that came after you will be finished and you're back on the stack, top of the stack. Then you might also get resumed, and finally when user presses back button, then your activity will be destroyed. So there are certain stages in the activity. Couple of important stages are Oncreate, which is at the beginning when an activity is created. You can set up some variables or some things you'll have to initialize in this Oncreate method. Put those code in here. And there is another activity which is onResume, which is called right before the activity is shown on the screen. So during the Oncreate, you might not be able to deal with some certain features that assumes I can't give an example right now, but there are certain resources that you cannot really deal with on Oncreate, but especially those related to user interface related features. But on onResume, once all of the initialization has been gone through, onResume is called right before your activity comes available on the screen, so you can do some of the things on onResume as well. Oops. And then while activity is running, you can interact with it, push buttons and sort of things. And once you've pushed a button and another activity takes over the screen, then your activity goes into pause state. So it's not fully destroyed or finished, but it's just paused. So in that case, this onPause method is called so that you can do some things that you might pause. If you had a timer, then you might want to pause it because you don't want to spend too much CPU time doing some processing on the background. So you might want to do some pausing things here. And then once the other activity that took over the screen finishes, then it will come back to your activity. Then it will, the activity will resume again. And in this case, it will not create from the scratch, but it will just simply come back to you in this onResume method, so that you can restart your timers or whatever you've paused in the onPause method. And sorry, I keep scrolling. And when finally the user finished using that activity and pressed back button or an exit button, then the activity will go through shutting down process, going through these methods called in a row. Finally, on destroy, you'll have to deallocate any resources you have been holding, like memories or certain devices and sort of things. Your activities destroyed. And this is actually how all of those stages are called back to your activity class. So, for example, if you have created an activity called example activity, it will extend the base class called activity, which is an Android SDK defined class. And then these are the methods that you override from that class, so that the system will call these known methods whenever, when at an appropriate stage of the life cycle of your activity. So while we are code today, we might do some memory allocation or some initialization in Oncreate method quite a lot. And then we might do something in onDestroy to get rid of some resources we've set up. And sometimes you might want to do something in onResume or onPause, assuming that the activity might get taken over by another activity that starts. So that's kind of background thing that I wanted to make sure you are at least you have heard of those words I've briefly mentioned, activities, and has a certain life cycle and have different callbacks at different stages. And now maybe we can start coding and creating an Android application. So in Eclipse, if you have an Eclipse, you can start a new Android activity by pressing the File menu and then New, and then if there is one, you can straightly select Android application project. Otherwise, you might need to go through Other, and then from the dialog box, Android folder, and then Android application project. And then you can fill in the application name and the project name and the Java package namespace. Again, this is using Java, so it's the whole app itself has a package namespace of its own. And each application are identified this package name. So if there are two applications sharing the same package name, then when you install another application that has the same package name that's already installed, then it will take over and uninstall the previous application. So it's good to make sure that package name you use for the application is a unique one. Usually you can use your own email addresses, URL in reverse order, something. Okay. And then again, we'll be using Android 4.0.3 version for this tutorial, but whatever version of Android you are coding, you can choose from there. And you can use default values for the rest. So let's do that right now. So in the ADT Eclipse, you can go to New Android Application Project. And you'll be greeted by this dialog box here. You can put your name. I'll put it Hello World. My application will be called Hello World, and my project name, which will be appearing here. And this application name usually is a title that appears on the device icon, the icon of your app. And you can give the package name. In my case, I put it hit nz.hello world. And then you can choose different settings for minimum required SDK, target SDK, which is the main device that you are targeting to run on. But we'll not worry about that too much. We'll just go with 4.0.3 now. And we'll compile with, since we are starting with Android programming, we'll just choose all of them as an Android SDK. Theme, we can leave it as a default and press next. Then you can uncheck some of the options, but we'll go with the default option where we create our custom icon, create a custom, create an default activity, and then create the workspace in the work projects. And then if you step next, and then you'll be able to choose your icon. So it's handy that if you don't have any images ready, you can actually choose from clip art, like one of these clip arts. You can create some from scratch, or you can also make it from a text that you type in. It will create an icon. So but I'll go with the clip art now. And maybe since it's Hello World, maybe some kind of globe thing. And you can also choose different colors for maybe green. I'll choose green. And that it will automatically create a set of icons. By the way, Android devices has quite a lot of different form factors, including the screen resolution and the screen size. So usually the resources such as icon might end up having different versions for different screen resolutions. So that's why here it's creating a bunch of icons which look similar but has different size, different image size. Then once you are happy with that icon, you click next, and then you'll be going to create an activity. There are other options, but for now we'll just start with from scratch, starting with a blank activity. And then you can name the class of that first activity. We'll just leave it as a main activity. I'll let you know what this means later on. Then we'll go with the default value and click finish. There we go. And now it will generate some code, and that's your project. That's created just now. So just quickly go through what's in that project. And actually it's now already, you can launch it with the automatically generated code already. And maybe I'll hand out these phones. Who hasn't been programming on Android that much? So maybe I'll give priority to those who haven't been programming on Android before. So some phone, one more phone here. So feel free to grab. And those who have your own Android phones, then you can use those. Yep. And on the Android phone, if you haven't used it for development before, then there in the settings there might be some options for turning on the development options. So make sure that's turned on. Coding. I'll take this tablet for coding right now. There we go. And just like yesterday, I'll start Android screencast. GDK, sync. Should do the trick. Yes. I'll come back to screencast. I'm just doing something to show you the screen on my laptop, so don't be minded what I'm doing now. All right, so that's the screen on my tablet. So I'll unlock it. Usually in the settings, you'll find some might look different on your phones, but there might be some options saying developer options, and you'll have to make sure to find an option called USB debugging, because we are connecting the phone with your development environment through USB. So make sure this is checked, and that will make sure you'll be able to launch your own application on your phone. So coming back to my Eclipse environment, why is this keeping appearing? Don't need that. So we didn't change anything in the code-wise. It's just a bare-bone app project that we just created. The way you can launch it is you right-click on the project, and then there is a menu called Run As, and then an Android application option that you can choose from. The other option is if you have chosen the project, there is a button, looks like a play button here. So you can go from there as well, but I usually use the context menu just to make sure which project I chose. So if I run it and wait for a while to see how it runs on my tablet, we'll compile and push the app, and ta-da! So you can see here, this is the Hello World app that I've just created. It has nothing on the screen, just shows the title and a small text down here, but it's just blank screen there. So we'll start from here to create some more interactive application. So press the home button to go back. So just close all. So just to quickly go through what are in the project, inside the project. First, there's a source folder where your Java classes are. Again, these are all organized in Java namespaces or packages. So be minded of that as you add a new class to make sure you're putting them on the same package, unless you're in purpose. Gen folder, I'll come back in a minute. These three are libraries that it's building against, and that's the Android library, some private libraries from Android using, and the other folder will be quite mentioning a lot is this resource folder. And by default, it has created a lot of different folders already. There are folders that are named similar here. And as you can see here, by the way, drawable is images or vector graphics that you can draw on the screen. These are the resources that you can use inside the code. But there are different folders here, which is grouped by the screen resolution it can be used for. By default, if you don't have this ending appendix on the name, let me just quickly create a folder to just show you how it works. So these are just plain folders that contains files inside. And they are just using the name to make sure what it is for, drawable. And drawables are for images, vector graphics, or XML defined drawable objects. And again, if you have an appended words like these HDPI, LDPI sort of things, these are representing different version of resources that can use for different resolution. different devices that has different resolution. So HDPI represents high definition, high dot per inch, DPI dot per inch, I guess. So this one has this size of icon. And then if I open up the extra high DPI one, that might be a little bit bigger image there. But doesn't really matter. As far as you have the same name, the system will automatically choose the one that is relevant for the device you're running. By default, you can have just a folder that without any of these resolution specified, then it will pick up, the system will pick up from this folder by default. Again, these other resources also can have these kind of appendix at the end of their name, but in this case, they are just created for generic use. And these values as well, these also represent the screen size. Some of them are representing different versions of Android, since there are quite a lot of different versions of Android devices running. So, but you can ignore them at the moment and just focus on these folders that doesn't have any appendix, which are the default values, I would say. So again, resources, you can have some icons, images. Layout represents the screen layout you have in the activity. So if you open it up, it will open up with this kind of editor. You can double click or press enter on this file. And you might, depending on your system setup, you might see this kind of GUI tool that you can drag and drop different UI elements. Or there is a tab down here that you can actually see how it looks like in the code. So this is actually an XML file that defines the UI elements that you'll be using on the screen. So these two tabs are actually the same file again, but this is just an additional tool that helps you fiddle with the screen layout. So let me make this screen a little bit bigger. Oops. By the way, you can double tap on each of the pane on the Eclipse to make them big or small. I think I would like to make it small, which I think it's this. I will also scroll this there and then make it a little bit bigger. So as you can see here, this is the screen that we've already seen on the phone. If it was a phone, it might have looked like this. You can also simulate or try to simulate different settings, like you can change the orientation of the screen and see how that layout will look like on different orientations. And you can also choose different app themes, but we'll leave it for now until we go with Glass programming. So in here, this is basically the title bar here showing the name of that activity. You can click on different UI elements, such as this one is a text label that you can drag and drop at different places. If you drag towards the middle, it will try to align at the center, so you can make it in that way. And on the left side of this GUI editor, there are different widgets that you can choose from. So there are buttons, labels. If you go through different sections, text fields for passwords and different formatted text fields. Layouts are a kind of invisible UI element that contains other UI elements to lay out them in a certain way within the screen. And then there are other more complicated things like image view where you can drag and drop an image there, or even a calendar or this one is an interesting one. This is actually a live clock. I'll just put it there for curiosity. And then for now, maybe we'll drag and drop a couple of buttons out and place it there. And as you can see here, while we are dragging and dropping the buttons and all the UIs here, they are reasonably easy enough to lay them out, but put them in place where you want. but they might change their layout as the screen orientation changes or the resolution of the screen resolution of the device you're running. If it changes, for instance, if I choose like a tablet, then it might look quite different on a tablet. So one way to make the layout a little bit more relevant, I'll switch back to Nexus S. So is to use these layout components. So there are a couple of different types of layouts, but today we'll be mainly using linear layouts and relative layout. The default layout you have here is relative layout. As you can see here, it shows some guidelines that it's actually describing where these buttons are placed relative to another user element or relative to the parent or the main screen. So if you go to the XML screen code of that layout, the top or root element is actually the relative layout. You drag and drop all the other UIs elements beneath it. So here's an Android clock here, and if you go through, you can see it's defining how to align these to align to the left of the parent, then align it to the top of the parent, and have a margin saying 20 by 18. That's actually why this arrow shows here that it's aligning against the top of the screen or top of the parent layout and left side of the layout. So that's how that's described in the code here. So by default, it starts with a relative layout, so you can drag it, the buttons and place it relatively to the parent, either the parent layout or another button. But if you drag and drop a linear layout, it will show you nothing. It will just show you an empty space here. But what you can do is actually drag and drop different UI elements to that layout. If you drag close enough to that layout, then it will highlight like this. You can put it in there. And once that's in there, and if you go back to the XML, you can see that these two buttons are actually grouped within that layout. And that's because of I have this margin, but if I remove these margins, then that will be laid out in a button. And by the way, if you want to look at the hierarchical structure without going to the XML file, there is a pane down here that shows how each items are placed in terms of the hierarchical structure of the layouts. So, and for the linear layout, as you add more items, it will either grow in vertical way, or you can also actually have a horizontal layout and change it like change it to a horizontally expanding layout. But for now, we'll not worry about that. We'll just make it clean like that. Then once you're done, just press Control S or Command S to save the file, or just file save. And then if you run it again, you'll see those elements coming up on the screen. So again, running is right-click, run as an Android application. So I just started it up on my device. So we'll see how it looks like. There we go. So by just simply dragging and dropping some of the UI element, I have this screen layout working with the live clock here and a couple of buttons that I click that I can not click on here, but I should click on the device itself. So I can click on them. Nothing happens at the moment, but we'll make some codes for those. So since I'm working on the Android tablet, oops, I've pressed the wrong button. I'll try to make it bigger so that it will be easier for you to have a look. Maybe that's an 8-inch tablet. which I think it's not here, but I'll just choose the closest one. So look like this. So maybe it's better to make this bigger. So, and each UI element has a property with it, either a property for laying it out or the title, which is not really good. Maybe this one is better. Have a look. So either the label that you have on the button, those are all properties of each of the UI elements, and you can edit them on these pane on the right, bottom right corner. So if you go through, these are the properties that you can tweak to make the UI elements different. The first one we can do is in here you can see this text label here. So you can, if you change it to button 1, then it will, in the layout, the label will be changed to button 1 here. You can type in whatever text here, like hello, then it will be updated in that way. Again, same with the label as well. It's saying hello world. In this case, it's using string here, but I can just delete that and just say hello, hello. Then it will get updated. You can also define the text size. In 50, you can give 50, then it will appear bigger. You can put 20 and it will appear smaller. Please don't be minded with this unit appended to it. It represents scalable device-independent pixel, which is a kind of device-independent unit between different resolution, screen resolution, and devices. But we'll leave it for now. You can just type in the numbers and it will automatically append the unit. Or even without the unit, it should still work. So I'll just keep going. And there is one important property that you have to be aware of, which is ID here. So this ID here, if you choose one of the elements, then there should be, most of the case, there should be an ID already given to you. And this ID is actually the ID that you'll be using in your code to reference to these UI elements. So these UI elements are defined in an XML file. The Android system will load them up as you launch. But your code actually goes into a Java file here. So to reference the UI elements you define in the XML code, you'll be using this ID property to reference them. And what the Android SDK does is actually collect all these IDs and create corresponding Java variables in this gen folder here. So if I come back to this gen folder, if you open it up, it's just a Java class, bunch of Java classes here, especially just one Java class named R. And this one is all of the collection of the ID values here collected into a variable. So if I see here, this is hello button as an ID of button 1. If I go here and have a look at in R class and open it up, it will show you quite a bunch of static final int values here, but with a name of the ID itself. And as you can see here, under the ID class, there is actually button 1, which was the ID of that button I was fiddling with here. And if I change this button to reset button, by the way, for ID, it's I think you can still use capital letters, but conventionally, most of the Android projects uses all lower cases. So update, and if I press enter, then it will say, do you want to update all references, which might be using the same, referencing to this ID, then you can just simply say yes, and you name reset button, okay. And it will all rename the relevant resources, and now this button has an ID of reset button. And if you go back to this R class and go to the ID value, then why is it not updated? Oh, that's because I haven't saved this XML file. So once I've saved it, it should build again. Then go back to ID. Then, as you can see here, button 1 is now gone, and there is another one called reset button here. So again, this gen folder is automatically taken care by the SDK, so you don't have to worry. I just wanted to point it out that you define something in XML is automatically collected by the system, and it generates representing corresponding class within the namespace of R, and then it defines integer variables, which has the same name of that you defined in the ID of your resource here. So that's that. So we'll do a couple of layout things here. I'll change this text to reset button, and then maybe change this button to set name. Then I'll get rid of this one button here, and we'll just go with these buttons. And then maybe I'll put this text back to hello world. So that's there, and then I'll get rid of this clock, which doesn't make much sense. And for this linear layout here, I'll change the orientation to horizontal, so we'll have the buttons in horizontal way, and then just drag it down to put it at the middle of the screen. Maybe I'll better put. By the way, if you want to choose the layout, not the button, you can press escape key. Then it will try to choose the one level up resource. So in this case, I can choose the whole layout in this way, drag it down a little bit further, and place this hello world layout in the middle, and then place this layout relative to, why is it not going? I'll do this again. The middle, then to the top. All right, so that's all done. I'll maybe make it a little bit bigger, like 40 something. So that's the hello world screen that we'll be using. Save it. And then what I would do from now on is to make some codes that you can actually press the button and make something happen. So coming back, explaining about these resource folders, you can put icons in the drawable folders. Layout folder is screen layouts, like this one. And there is also another resource called menu. So these are the system menus that you can invoke. And if you open it up, it's again an XML file. Android SDK kindly provides you a GUI to edit them, but I personally prefer editing the XML file because it's much cleaner to look at. So as you can see here, again, these are all defined in XML, but again, it's quite similar to the layout resource as well. It has an ID so that you can refer in your code. And you can have a title. In this case, it's referring to a string resource, but you can pretty much type in whatever menu. So for the first menu, I'll say hello Android. And maybe I can also copy one more item. So we'll create another menu and call it hello glass maybe. So we just created 2 menu items here, which will be picked up by the system. So anyway, those are menus. Inside the values, there are a couple of different things you can store here as well. and one of them is strings here. So the strings are actually just plain strings, but you can actually give them name. The reason why they have these kind of strings is that you might want to use different actual sentences for different languages or different screen layouts and different Android device versions and sort of things. So that's in that case, you can again define multiple folders of values with different appendixes, so that even you are referring with the same ID or the same name of the string, you'll get the actual values of the string in a different way. For instance, in this case, this app name resource is actually used in one in the manifest that actually uses this string, I guess, but we'll leave it there for now. And then, so those are the resources. So to wrap up again, source folders, you have Java classes. Gen folder is automatically generated by the system to give you, let you refer to the IDs or different resources in the REST folder. In the resource folder, you have a bunch of different resources such as icons, images, or XML files that defines the layout or menu items and sort of things. And the one last thing I would like to mention is this Android manifest thing. And this is kind of a settings file of your whole application that lets the Android operating system know how it should treat your application. So inside the manifest, you can define version codes. Like in this case, it's automatically 1.0 by default. You can define what kind of Android version it requires to run. And inside there shows what kind of icon it is using. And again, as you can see here, you can refer to different resources by their IDs here. And by the way, you can state the type of the resource, which is basically the name of the folder you've seen here, and the ID of that resource. Then you're actually stating we're going to use a drawable which has an ID of this for the icon. And again, for example, this string was in the values here. So there was a bunch of values, string values resources here, which was app name. Name was app name. And again, in the manifest file, it's actually using that string resource. So this is actually the same as, but you can either use the resource or you can actually type in the actual string you want to use, but we'll leave it for now. And then, as you can see here, it also defines what kind of activity it has. So again, as I've mentioned earlier, activities Android system can call different activities for different purposes, and sometimes the Android operating system has to know what kind of activities your application has. So this is where the operating system looks for. So once you ask the operating system to start a certain activity, either stating by a class name or stating by a purpose of your activity you're looking for, what Android OS will do is actually look into this manifest XML and try to look for activity from here. So it will not look for the class you've created. It will look into this XML file. And if your activity is not defined in this XML file, then Android system will never know that activity exists. So you'll have to make sure your activity, whenever you create a new activity, make sure it's defined in here. And usually it's managed automatically by the Eclipse IDE environment. So could say it a lot, but that was briefly going over how the project looks like. And the next thing I wanted to do was to show you how to create handlers for events. So if I go to the resource folder back to the layout to get to the button. And if you choose one of these buttons, you'll actually see one of the properties down here. In the view, I guess, is a property named onClick. So here you can actually define the method you want to call when this button is clicked. So maybe I'll say onClicked reset and press enter. And as you can see here, that is set to this string, which represents the name of the method that it will call when it's clicked. And this is, by the way, handled by the operating system. It matches this string to the name of the method you'll be calling, so don't worry too much about that. So, and then what you'll have to do is define a method in your class that represents the activity itself. So this was again automatically generated when you created the project, which represents your main activity. If you go to the activity, there are certain methods that's already defined. Like onCreate was the method that's called back when the activity starts. So here's the place where you usually have setting up your screen. This line is setting up your screen to the layout this resource defines, which we were just editing right now. And this is setting up the menu system from the menu resource you've defined. So that code is automatically put in there. And the handler you have to define is actually void, returns a void type. And you use the same name as you defined it back in the layout activity, the layout resource. So here we defined this onClick property as to call the onClicked reset method in my class. So in my class, we'll have to make sure it's using the same name for the method here as well. And by the way, this has to be public. And then, and it has a special type of parameter it has to receive, which is a view that is clicked, but don't worry about that for now. Just type in there. And again, Eclipse, you can hover over your cursor and it will give you some suggestions to fix the errors. And in this case, it's because we haven't imported the class in this file. So maybe I'll stop and go back to my slide and just go through what we've been done so far. So I've mentioned about the layout file, XML file, so you can lay them out in a certain way you want. Handling UI events, we are explaining about this. So again, in the XML file, you define the onClick property as the name of your method you want to call when it's onClicked. And inside your Java class of that activity, you define a method that's named in the same way as you defined in the XML file. And it has to have be public and returns void and has to receive a view as a parameter which represents the button that was clicked. And we'll create just one more code, which is a toast message. So toast is a simple method that you can show some message on the screen. You might have noticed if you are an Android user, you might have noticed some of the message appear in a small black box like here and then disappears in a second or so. So that's called toast. That's the name of that thing. So to create a toast message is to use this method, but I'll show you how to type that method in a minute. So coming back, again, we've created up to this method. And whenever this clicked, I would like to say hello. So you first type toast and then press dot. And Eclipse will help you to choose which method you want to call. In my case, I will be calling this one with character sequence. Press enter. And context is usually the activity itself, so you can just put this. In the text, you can say hello world. And then in the duration, you'll have to define a special value, which is defined in the toast class again. So if you type in toast and then press dot, then there will be length short or long. You can choose from, then short. And if you have made up to here, it's create a toast, and then if you press dot again, then it's show. Then it did, and as you invoke this show method, then it will appear on the screen. So what we've done so far was with the toast class, we created a toast with a text, and then we asked the system to show it. So if you're not familiar with some of the methods here, if you hover your mouse over a method, then it will show you what kind of parameter it has to have. If you scroll down, then it will explain what kind of values it can pass, so forth. So it will be easy enough to choose from those values. So if you're up to here, I'll run it again. We're a little bit behind the schedule, but maybe I made some changes to the manifest. I'd like to make sure I didn't change anything serious. Yep, that's fine. So run as Android application, and I'll go back to my screencast application. Then open up my so now it has a new layout, and if I press this reset button, you'll see in a minute that hello world toast pops up and goes away. If I press it again, it will show the toast and then go away. So creating toast messages is a simple way that you want to try different things and make sure something happens and give some feedback to the user. So going back, maybe I'll change this code into, since the button is called reset, maybe I'll actually change it to resetting the message hello world. So what we're going to do here is actually set with different names and different will allow the application to set say hello to different names in this app. So we'll do that in a moment. To the slide. Another way to handle the events is actually defining your method by code, but I won't cover this in this demo. So please have a look at one of these links, or it's as simple as just coding this set on click listener and defining your listener. Listeners are usually Java interfaces that other classes can know what kind of method you are defining. So if you're implementing that interface in your class, it's making sure that you're implementing the methods of that interface so that another class or another object could call those methods of you. And here, what I would like to demo is how to refer to the resources we've defined in the XML inside the code. The main method we'll be using this is find view by ID method, and giving the ID of that resource, then you'll be given back the view object that you can actually call methods and so forth. And another thing I would like to demo right now, maybe this will be the last thing I would demo for now, and it's how to deal with menus. And to deal with the menus, you'll have to actually override these methods on create. On options item selected method, so that the system will call your class back to this method with the menu item selected, so you can do different things based on the menu. And on create options menu is by default implemented by the Eclipse at the beginning, so it simply loads the menu from the XML file and lets you have them. So since we are running out of time, let me just simply import that Hello World project and show you the actual code I'm using here. Import existing projects. And again, this project is on the shared folder, so feel free to download it and use it. Tutorial projects, GDK 1, Android, this one, and then copy it to, there you go. So if I go back to my screen, so I've implemented quite different things, but what I would like to highlight now is this options item selected menu item. So this method will be called whenever you choose the menu item, so that it will be passed and you can look at the ID of that item and do different things. In this case, I'm referencing to the text view, which was in the middle of the screen, and then set the text to Android since I've chosen the menu item saying say hello Android. You can do different messages for different items, and you can actually that's the reset button we've created before, and as you can see here, you might wonder how did I get this object, and that's up on this Oncreate method, and here you can find this line of code here. I'm defining this text view variable as my member variable here. This is a class that represents the text view. And then what I'm doing is I'm calling a find view by ID and passing that ID of that UI element I would like to refer to. And then this method will give me back an object that I can refer to that object, so that if I change the name of this, then it will be updated on my. So let me run this one and show you how it looks like. So now, oops. Now I have the same UI elements on the screen, but what's different now is if I press this menu button up here, it has say hello Android, and say hello world, which we've changed it from the XML file. If I choose one of those, we'll change the text label here, which was handled by the. And if I choose hello glass, we'll update it here. And if I press this reset, oops, I have to press here. Press reset button, then it will go back to a hello world message, which was initially done. So those are the code that I've just explained. And by the way, this code shows how to define the handler of button click event by code, but we'll skip that for now. And then the last thing I would like to cover, and maybe have a break afterwards, is launching another activity from your activity. So again, to briefly review what we've mentioned before, whenever we want to launch another activity, and in this case, what we want to do is, I'll demo it first and then show you how the code works, is if I press this set name button, it will start another activity, and it will ask your name, saying what's your name, and then if I type in my name and then press OK, the activity will go away and then come back to the previous activity and will say hello, gone to my name. So here we are calling another activity to start. We are getting some value from the activity back to my activity and use that value for updating the screen in the middle. So to launch another activity, first thing we'll have to create an intent object. And with the intent object, you can either specify the name of that activity you are calling, the class name of that activity you are calling, and you'll have to actually pass the class object, so you'll have to do this dot class thing next to your activity. And then what you call is start activity method of your own activity. And then that intent will be passed to the system, and the system will figure out if there is actually an activity that has that class name, and then if it finds, then it will launch that activity. And in case you want to get some values back from that activity you're launching, you might have to use slightly different method called activity for result. And again, you pass the same intent here, but one more parameter you pass is an integer value of request code that once that activity you've called and finishes, it will return back a value through the method in your class called onActivityResult, so that in that case, if you have multiple different activities you're calling, then it will make sure you know from which activity you have been returned from. So again, the request code you pass when you invoke another activity will be called back with the same value. So if you have put 100 here, and it will be called back 100 here, so that you know it's the activity that you've, which activity it's coming back from. And to close the activity is to just simply call finish method, then your activity will be shutting down. And before you finish, you can also set the results here, and optionally a data you can pass to the previous activity that actually called yourself. So that intent data will be called, passed back to your previous activity that called your activity. So going back to Eclipse, I'll show you how that code is actually written here. So for onSetName button, I'm calling on another activity here. So I'm creating an intent to create an askName activity class, which is defined in here. Again, this is another activity that's another screen that you've seen. You can enter the name. And it's calling this start activity for result, since I want to get some results back. And I'm just giving a random number that I can identify, so that I can know it's actually back from the askName activity. And here I'm defining a method onActivityResults, which will be called back once the activity is finished and comes back to my activity. And I'm checking if it's the request code is the same as I've passed. And if it's the same, and if it's the results was fine, then what I'm doing is, again, as I've mentioned before, you can actually get back some data through intent here as well. So I'm getting the data back through here, and then setting the text to hello with the string I've got back from that activity. And on the askName activity side, what I'm doing is the rest is pretty much the same as the other activity. So I'm finding a UI element by the name of that UI element, which is defined in another XML file, which if you go to the res folder, there will be two XML files now. One is for the X activity name, and this has editable text field here and an OK button here. So I'm trying to find this UI element, which I typed in the name. And by the way, this is ID et text name, et name. So again, I'm using that ID to find that UI element, and it will be returned back to me as a view. And since I know it's an editable text, I put it in this object. And then from there, I get a text from that UI element and put it into an intent data and set it as a result and finish my activity, so that the system will pass back this intent data to the previous activity, which called this activity, to this onActivityResult. So It sounds a little bit complicated, but if you look through the code, then I'm pretty sure it will make sense if you compare it to the slides I have here. Last useful tool I would like to mention here is this log.d thing, log.d method. Log is actually a class, and d is a class method. If you're debugging Android codes, it's always good to have some kind of log messages you want to look at. And this is the method you can call to create log messages. And as you can see here, there are some methods I'm already calling. There are different level of importance, like D is for debugging. I think I stands for information. Usually you just try to log something is not serious. E is for error. Of course, you can log everything in D, but if you want to have some different levels of importance, then you can do that as well. This one here is not a bad word, but officially it's called "What a Terrible Failure." So it's not an effort. So it is Android recommends you to use this whenever you have a kind of really serious thing you have to log. Yeah, if you have something really serious that your activity is not working in a perfect way, then you use this one. And if you call this method, how to view these messages you logged is in Android. If you go to window and choose this show view, and there should be, or if it's not on the menu, you can choose others. And if you go to Android, there is a view called logcat. And I think it's disabled for me because I already have that view down here. But in your case, if you haven't, then you can choose OK. Then this logcat view will appear. And this is all the log messages my device is currently printing out. And already the system itself prints out quite a lot of log messages. And so it's always easier if you filter out with your own application. So if I run my application now, I give it to the logcat. One way you can filter is add filters here, and let's filter the name. And I think that's the main activity. So that's what I just did was when you log a message, you pass a tag string as well. This is nothing but a string that's defined up here as a name of this class itself. So you pass the tag as well, so you can filter some of the log messages out. And while I was defining this filter, I've just typed in the filter name, filter1, and then I put that tag name here, which is I'm looking for a main activity class. Then if you click on that filter, it will only show the log messages that is filtered with that tag. So it will be easier for you to look at certain log messages you are looking for. So that's all for Android programming. I think I ran over 30 minutes more, but I'm pretty sure it should be fine since you might not take too much time for setting up. And if you want to look more, Android developer website has quite a good documentation of helping you with finding out different classes you want to use. And there are also tutorials pages you can use. So please feel free to those. And next, we'll maybe have a short break and make sure everybody has the correct USB driver for the Google Glass. And at the meantime, if you could import those who already have those USB drivers correctly, then if you can import the project that we just finished, which is GDK 1, not the other one. This one will be what we are building. So if you import this one, then you can follow the rest of the steps I'll be doing to change the Android app into a Glass app, so to say. So we'll have a break. Maybe it will be